The massive holographic display filled the entire wall of the galactic trading station. Numbers glowed in bright red letters, showing odds that made even the bravest pilots shake their heads and walk away. At the bottom of the list, one name stood out like a death sentence waiting to happen. Sojin Park Human Earth Registry. Survival probability, 2.1%. Sojin stood in front of the display with her arms crossed, studying the numbers like she was reading a shopping list. Around her, dozens of alien beings whispered among themselves. Some pointed at her with whatever appendages they used for pointing. Others made clicking sounds that she had learned meant they thought she was crazy. The Void Run was not just any smuggling route. It was the most dangerous passage in known space, threading through unstable wormholes and gravitational nightmares that had claimed more ships than any military battle. Even the most experienced pilots avoided it unless they had no other choice. The cargo sitting in Bay 94 had been there for 3 months because no one was willing to take the risk. "You sure about this, rookie?" The voice belonged to Commander Tae-ho Kim, the highest-ranking human officer on the station. He had been trying to talk her out of this for the past week. "Those medical supplies can wait for a safer route to open up." Sojin turned around to face him. Tae-ho was older, maybe 50, with gray hair and worry lines around his eyes. He had been in space longer than she had been alive, but he did not understand what she was seeing when she looked at those numbers. "The colony on Kepler 442c cannot wait," she said. "The plague is getting worse every day. Those people will be dead in 2 months if we do not get the medicine to them now. And you will be dead in 2 days if you take that route," Tae-ho replied. "Look at the numbers, Sojin. The galactic probability engine does not make mistakes. It has calculated every possible variable. The gravitational forces alone will tear your ship apart." Sojin smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the kind of smile her grandfather used to get when someone told him that humans could not climb mountains that were too tall, or cross oceans that were too wide, or survive in places that were too cold. "The engine calculates what it knows," she said, "but it does not know everything about humans." She walked over to the betting terminal. The crowd of aliens grew larger as word spread that the crazy human was actually going to do it. The Krolix delegation started making their gurgling laugh sounds. The tall, thin Benthari began taking notes on their data tablets. Even the rock-like Thorians seemed interested, though it was hard to tell with them. The betting interface recognized her biometric signature and displayed her account balance. It was everything she had saved since joining the merchant fleet 2 years ago. Not enough to buy a better ship, not enough to retire on, but enough to make one very big bet. "You have accessed the Void Run betting pool," the computer announced in its neutral voice. "Current odds for human survival, 2.1%. Minimum bet, 500 galactic credits. Your available balance, 15,847 credits." Sojin looked at the numbers again. If the aliens were so sure she would fail, then they would not mind taking her money. But if she succeeded, well, that would be a different story. "I want to place a bet," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The crowd went quiet. Even the Krolix stopped laughing. "Specify bet parameters," the computer requested. "All of it," Sojin said. "My entire balance. I bet that Sojin Park will complete the Void Run successfully." The silence stretched for several seconds. Then someone in the crowd started laughing. Others joined in. Soon the entire observation deck was filled with the sounds of a dozen different species expressing amusement. "Are you insane?" Tae-ho grabbed her arm. "You are betting against odds that were calculated by the most advanced computers in the galaxy. Those machines have analyzed every ship that ever attempted the Void Run. They know exactly what will happen to you." Sojin gently removed his hand from her arm. "The machines know what happened to other ships," she said. "They do not know what will happen to me." She turned back to the betting terminal and confirmed her wager. The computer processed the transaction and updated the odds display. Her bet was so large compared to her survival chances that it barely moved the numbers, but it was enough to get attention. Admiral Vex 9 of the Krolix Trading Consortium pushed through the crowd. He was nearly 3 meters tall with purple skin and 4 arms that ended in claws sharp enough to cut through metal. His species had been running smuggling operations for thousands of years. They knew dangerous routes better than anyone. "Human," he said in his rough translated voice. "Your species has been in space for what, a few hundred years? My people have been navigating the Void Run since before your world had cities. We know what kills ships out there." "I am sure you do," Sojin replied. "But knowing what kills other ships is not the same as knowing what will happen to my ship." Vex 9's 4 eyes narrowed. The gravitational shears will rip your hull apart. The wormhole instabilities will scatter your atoms across 3 star systems. The radiation will cook you alive even if you somehow survive the first 2 jumps. These are not opinions. These are facts calculated by machines that do not make errors. Sojin nodded politely. Your machines are very good at calculating what they can measure, she said. But they cannot measure everything. She walked over to the cargo manifest terminal and began the process of claiming the medical supplies. The crowd followed her, still talking among themselves in various alien languages. Most of them seemed to think she was either very brave or very stupid. A few seemed to think she might be both. The cargo was worth more than her ship. Concentrated antibiotics, surgical nanobots, and genetic therapy packages that could save millions of lives. The original shipping company had demanded payment up front because they were so sure the cargo would be lost. Sojin had already arranged the insurance and permits. All she needed now was to load the supplies and leave. Final question, Taeho said as she signed the transport documents. Why are you really doing this? The truth this time. Sojin looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the crowd of aliens who were so certain she would fail. Because someone told me the odds were 98% against me, she said. And I have always liked those kinds of odds. The Soul's Pride sat in docking bay 12 like a metal whale surrounded by tiny fish. Sojin's cargo hauler was not the prettiest ship on the station, but she had spent 2 years modifying every system until it ran exactly the way she wanted. The hull was scarred from asteroid impacts and solar flares, but the engines hummed with perfect efficiency. Loading the medical supplies took 6 hours. Each container had to be secured with magnetic clamps and shock absorbers. The medicine inside was delicate, designed to work at the cellular level. One hard impact could destroy millions of credits worth of treatments and doom the people waiting for them on Kepler 442c. While Sojin worked, news of her bet spread through the station like wildfire. Aliens who had never paid attention to human activities suddenly found reasons to walk past docking bay 12. Some pretended to be checking other ships. Others stood in groups and watched openly while making their clicking, buzzing, or whistling sounds. The Krolix delegation had set up a viewing platform in the observation lounge overlooking the docking bays. Admiral Vex 9 sat in the center like a purple king on his throne, surrounded by other Krolix traders who were already counting their winnings. They had pooled their resources to bet against Sojin, confident that their investment would double within a few days. The human shows impressive dedication to her own destruction, Vex 9 announced to his followers. Perhaps we should study this behavior for our psychological databases. Dr. Yunseo Lee stood at the back of the observation lounge, watching the preparations with professional interest. As the station's leading expert on gravitational physics, she had been asked to provide commentary for the official record. The Benthari data collectors wanted a human perspective on why their own species would attempt something so obviously impossible. Dr. Lee, said senior analyst Keth Prime of the Benthari Science Division, can you explain the psychological factors that drive your species to such self-destructive behavior? Yunseo smiled without taking her eyes off Sojin's ship. You assume this is self-destructive, she said. But you are measuring human behavior using non-human standards. The mathematics are universal, Keth Prime replied. Gravitational forces, structural stress limits, radiation exposure thresholds. These do not change based on species psychology. The mathematics are universal, Yunseo agreed. But the application of mathematics is not. Your calculations assume that pilot Sojin will respond to crisis situations the same way other species respond. That assumption may be incorrect. Down in the docking bay, Sojin was running her final equipment checks. She had installed 3 backup systems for every critical component. If the main navigation computer failed, the secondary would take over. If that failed, the tertiary system would engage. And if all 3 failed, she had the manual controls that her grandfather had taught her to use when she was 12 years old. But the most important modification was not visible from the outside. Hidden in the ship's data core was a special AI program that she had been working on for months. Most ship computers were designed to calculate optimal solutions to flying problems. Her AI was different. It was programmed with historical data from every impossible situation humans had ever survived. The program contained records of ancient sea voyages where ships had navigated by stars and instinct. It had data from atmospheric pilots who had flown through storms that should have torn their aircraft apart. It included information about mountain climbers who had survived falls that should have killed them, and soldiers who had won battles against overwhelming odds. So Jin called the program Hannah, after her grandmother who had been a pilot during Earth's early space exploration period. Hannah Park had been the first human to navigate through Saturn's rings using only visual references and manual controls. The official report said it was impossible, but she had done it anyway. "Hannah, are you ready?" Sojin asked as she settled into the pilot's seat. "All systems operational, Sojin," the AI replied in a voice that sounded exactly like her grandmother. "I have finished analyzing the Void Run data. The Galactic Probability Engine has made some interesting assumptions." "What kind of assumptions?" "They assume that all pilots will follow standard emergency procedures during crisis situations. They assume that ship systems will be used according to manufacturer specifications. They assume that flight paths will be calculated using approved navigation algorithms." Sojin grinned as she began the engine startup sequence. "And what do you think about those assumptions?" "Based on human historical data, I think those assumptions are approximately 67% wrong," Hannah said. "Humans have a tendency to ignore standard procedures when they are not working." The crowd in the observation lounge had grown larger. Word had spread to other sections of the station, and now representatives from a dozen different species had gathered to watch the human attempt the impossible. Betting pools had been established for dozens of specific variables. How far would she get before her ship was destroyed? Which obstacle would kill her first? Would she turn back before reaching the first jump point? The Thorian delegation had brought portable seating made from some kind of crystal that rang like bells when they moved. The Zephyrian traders hovered near the ceiling in their environmental suits, their gas-filled bodies glowing with excited colors. Even the mysterious void touched had sent an observer, though it stayed in the shadows where most beings could not see it clearly. "This is quite a gathering," Tejo said as he joined Dr. Lee near the viewing windows. "I have never seen so many species interested in a single shipping run." "It is not about the shipping run," Yunseo replied. "It is about the precedent. If Sojin succeeds, it will force every species in the galaxy to recalculate their understanding of human capabilities. And if she fails? Then humans remain a minor species that occasionally produces interesting cautionary tales." Down in the docking bay, Sojin received clearance from station control to begin her departure sequence. The massive bay doors began to open, revealing the starfield beyond. Her destination was a small jump point about 6 hours away at standard cruise speed. From there, the real challenge would begin. "Soul's Pride requesting departure clearance," she announced on the general communication channel. "Clearance granted," came the reply from the control tower. "Safe travels, Pilot Park. The galaxy will be watching." So Jin engaged the engines and felt the familiar vibration as her ship lifted off the docking platform. Through the observation lounge windows, she could see hundreds of alien faces watching her leave. Most of them expected never to see her again. "Hannah, what are the actual odds of survival based on your analysis?" she asked as they cleared the station's gravity field. "Assuming standard pilot behavior and equipment usage, approximately 2.1%, matching the Galactic Probability Engine calculations," Hannah replied. "However, assuming non-standard human behavior patterns, approximately 23.7%. I can live with those odds." "So Jin, there is one more variable the calculations did not consider." "What is that?" "You're not just any human. You are a human who bet everything on succeeding. Historical data suggests this changes the probability matrix significantly." So Jin smiled as the first jump point appeared on her navigation display. Behind her, the medical supplies hummed quietly in their protective containers. Ahead of her, the Void Run waited like an ancient dragon guarding its treasure. But dragons, she reminded herself, were just another kind of impossible odds. The first jump point looked like a tear in space itself. Sojin had seen wormhole entries before, but this one was different. Instead of the usual stable blue glow, this portal flickered between colors like a dying light bulb. Red warnings flashed across her navigation display, telling her what she already knew. The wormhole was collapsing. "Hannah, what does the data say about wormhole stability?" Sojin asked as she approached the entry point. "Standard protocol requires wormhole stability of at least 87% before attempting transit," Hannah replied. "Current stability reading is 23% and falling. The Galactic Safety Commission would classify this as impossible to navigate." "But what do the human records say?" Hannah paused for exactly 1.2 seconds, which was a long time for an AI to think. Human naval records from Earth show that your species has a history of navigating dangerous passages during storms. The principle appears to be timing and intuition rather than perfect conditions. So Jin studied the collapsing wormhole through her view screen. The opening was shrinking, but not at a steady rate. It pulsed like a heartbeat, growing smaller with each beat but occasionally stabilizing for a few seconds at a time. The galactic probability engine would see only the mathematical average. But So Jin saw something else. She saw a pattern. Hannah, ignore the official navigation protocols. Can you detect a rhythm in the collapse pattern? Analyzing, Hannah said. Yes, there appears to be a cycle every 47.3 seconds. The opening stabilizes for approximately 2.8 seconds during each cycle. Sojin smiled. Just like riding ocean waves back home. You do not fight the water, you ride it. She throttled up the engines and began her approach. In the observation lounge back at the station, hundreds of aliens watched through long-range sensors as the small human ship accelerated toward certain destruction. The betting pools had already started paying out, assuming her death was only minutes away. What is she doing? Admiral Vex 9 demanded. The wormhole is clearly unstable. Any rational pilot would abort immediately. Dr. Yunseo watched the sensor readings with growing interest. She is not following standard approach vectors, she observed. Look at her flight path. She is not trying to enter during a stable period. She is timing her approach to match the instability cycle. That makes no sense, Keth Prime said. The mathematics clearly show that entering during an unstable period increases destruction probability to 99.7%. The mathematics assume she will fly in a straight line at constant speed, Yunseo replied. But humans do not always do what makes mathematical sense. So Jin watched the wormhole pulse and fade, pulse and fade. Each cycle brought her closer to the entry point. She could feel the gravitational forces tugging at her ship like invisible hands trying to pull her apart. Normal pilots would fight against these forces, using their engines to maintain a straight course. So Jin did the opposite. She let the gravitational waves carry her forward, using tiny engine bursts to adjust her position instead of fighting the natural flow. It was like surfing, except the waves were made of bent spacetime and the penalty for falling was death. Entry in 10 seconds, Hannah announced. Wormhole stability at 31% and rising toward peak instability. Perfect timing, Sojin said, and dove into the collapsing portal. The Soul's Pride disappeared into the flickering tear in space just as it snapped shut behind her. On the other side, she emerged into normal space with her hull intact and her cargo undamaged. The first impossible obstacle was behind her, but 3 jumps later, she faced something that made the collapsing wormhole look easy. The graveyard passage stretched before her like a monument to failed ambition. Thousands of wrecked ships floated in the gravitational field of a neutron star, their broken hulls telling the story of pilots who had tried to navigate this region and lost. The dense stellar remnant twisted space around itself so violently that even light bent into spiral patterns. Hannah, what is the standard approach for navigating neutron star gravity wells? Standard procedure requires maintaining minimum safe distance of 50,000 kilometers and using maximum engine power to resist gravitational pull, Hannah replied. However, analysis of the wreckage suggests that this approach has a failure rate of approximately 94% in this particular region. Sojin studied the debris field through her sensors. Most of the wrecked ships were clustered along what would have been the standard safe approach route. But scattered throughout the graveyard were pieces of ships that had tried different paths, ships that had gotten closer to the neutron star not farther away. Hannah, what if we do not fight the gravity? What if we use it? Explain. Look at the wreckage patterns. The ships that were destroyed farther out were fighting against forces they could not resist. But some of these closer wrecks show different damage patterns. They were not crushed by gravity. They were torn apart by trying to escape it too quickly. So Jin began plotting a course that would have made any flight instructor on Earth ground her permanently. Instead of staying at safe distance, she aimed directly toward the neutron star. Instead of fighting the gravitational pull, she planned to ride it like a roller coaster. This approach increases radiation exposure by 340%, Hannah warned. Can our shielding handle it? For approximately 18 minutes. After that, cellular damage becomes irreversible. So Jin checked her chronometer. How long to transit the danger zone using gravitational assist? 12 minutes, 14 seconds, assuming optimal trajectory management. Then we have 6 minutes to spare. Engaging approach pattern. The Soul's Pride dove toward the neutron star like a metal comet, using the incredible gravitational field to build up speed while Sojin made constant micro-adjustments to keep from being crushed or flung into the debris field. Her approach took her between broken hulls and shattered engines, using the wrecked ships as navigation markers. Back at the monitoring station, alien observers watched in stunned silence as the human ship performed maneuvers that their computers classified as impossible. Not just dangerous or unlikely, but mathematically impossible according to known laws of physics and engineering. How is she generating those acceleration vectors? Vex-9 demanded. Our sensors show she is using less than 30% engine power, but achieving thrust ratios that should require 150% power output. She is not generating the vectors, Dr. Yoon Seo realized. She is borrowing them from the neutron star itself. She is using gravitational slingshot effects in ways our navigation computers never considered. The Soul's Pride whipped around the neutron star like a stone from a sling, picking up tremendous velocity, while somehow avoiding the deadly radiation zones that had cooked previous ships. Sojin's unconventional approach had turned the graveyard into a speedway, using the very forces that destroyed other vessels to propel her forward. As she cleared the danger zone, her radiation detectors showed levels well within safe limits. The gravitational slingshot had carried her through the deadliest part of the passage so quickly that she had absorbed less radiation than ships that tried to go around the long way. Transit complete, Hannah announced. Cargo status secure. Hull integrity 100%. Radiation exposure 23% of recommended maximum. Sojin allowed herself a moment to breathe. 2 major obstacles down and she was still alive. But ahead of her lay the challenges that had destroyed even the most experienced pilots. The real test of her abilities was yet to come. In the observation lounge, the betting odds began to shift for the first time since her journey began. The binary maze appeared on Sojin's long-range sensors like 2 dancing giants locked in an eternal fight. The twin stars spun around each other so fast that they completed an orbit every 37 minutes. Their gravitational fields created a constantly shifting web of force that could crush a ship in 1 second and fling it into deep space the next. Hannah, show me the standard navigation approach for binary star systems, Sojin requested as she studied the sensor data. Her main display filled with a complex 3-dimensional map showing safe corridors through the gravitational chaos. The approved route twisted and turned like a snake, following narrow windows where the gravitational forces briefly canceled each other out. Ships that used this route needed massive computational power to calculate their exact position every millisecond. Standard transit time through the binary maze is 6 hours and 43 minutes, Hannah reported. Success rate for properly equipped vessels is 23%. Most failures occur when navigation computers cannot process gravitational changes fast enough to maintain safe trajectory. Sojin looked at her own navigation computer. It was good, but not nearly as advanced as the systems used by major shipping corporations. If she tried to follow the standard route, her computer would fall behind the calculations and she would be torn apart. What about non-standard approaches? She asked. There are no approved non-standard approaches. The gravitational forces are too complex for manual navigation. No organic pilot has sufficient reaction time to navigate by visual reference alone. Sojin smiled. Hannah, show me the historical records for human atmospheric fighter pilots. Specifically, combat flying in severe weather conditions. The display changed to show data from Earth's military archives. Videos of human pilots flying through thunderstorms, navigating between mountain peaks in zero visibility, and performing aerial combat maneuvers that pushed their aircraft beyond normal limits. These pilots were operating in 3-dimensional space with constantly changing conditions, Sojin observed. They could not calculate optimal flight paths because the conditions changed too fast. So what did they do? According to the records, they relied on spatial awareness, pattern recognition, and instinctive responses, Hannah said. They describe it as feeling the aircraft become part of their own body, responding to environmental changes without conscious thought. Exactly. They did not try to calculate the perfect path. They became part of the system and let the system guide them. Sojin began shutting down her navigation computer. Sojin, this action will leave you without computational assistance for gravitational analysis, Hannah warned. I know, But the computer is trying to predict something that cannot be predicted. It is like trying to calculate the exact path of a leaf falling in a windstorm. The leaf does not need to calculate. It just falls. She switched her main display to visual mode and disabled all automated flight systems. Now she was flying purely on manual control, with nothing between her and the binary stars except her own eyes and hands. The soul's pride entered the outer edge of the gravitational maze like a small bird flying into a hurricane. Immediately, Sojin felt the ship being pulled in 3 different directions at once. Her first instinct was to fight the forces, to use her engines to maintain a straight course. Instead, she relaxed. She let the gravitational currents take her ship and focused on feeling how the forces changed from moment to moment. The twin stars pulled at her with a rhythm she could sense through the vibrations in her hull. Like a dancer learning to follow music, she began to move with the beat instead of against it. Current trajectory indicates 73% probability of collision with stellar mass, Hannah announced. I know, Sojin said, making a tiny adjustment to her engine output. The ship curved away from the larger star just as its gravitational pull reached peak strength. I can feel where we need to go. In the observation lounge, alien experts watched her approach with growing amazement. Her flight path made no sense according to any known navigation theory. She was flying directly toward the most dangerous zones, then making seemingly random course corrections at the last possible moment. She should have been destroyed 17 times by now, Keth Prime said, checking his calculations for the 5th time. According to my analysis, her current position is mathematically impossible. Perhaps your mathematics are incomplete, Dr. Yoon Seo suggested. Human pilots have always been able to do things that computers said were impossible. We call it instinct, but it might be something more complex. Admiral Vex 9 was no longer laughing. What is she using for navigation if not her computers? Watch her flight pattern, Yoon Seo said. She is not fighting the gravitational forces. She is dancing with them. Sojin felt the rhythm of the binary system in her bones. The larger star pulled her forward. The smaller one tugged her sideways, and the combined effect created a spiraling path that carried her deeper into the maze. Every few seconds she made small corrections, not because her computer told her to, but because something deep in her mind recognized the patterns. It was like riding ocean currents during a storm, or skiing down a mountain slope in an avalanche. Dangerous, yes, but also natural if you stopped fighting and started flowing. Hannah, what is our current speed? 47% above normal cruise velocity and increasing. The gravitational assist is accelerating us beyond safe parameters. Hull stress? Within acceptable limits. Sojin, you are using the binary system like a natural accelerator. This technique does not exist in any navigation database. Sojin grinned as she felt the ship surf through another gravitational wave. It does now. Her approach took her between the 2 stars at a distance that would have terrified any sane pilot. The stellar radiation was so intense that her hull temperature rose by 60 degrees. But the gravitational slingshot effect launched her through the system faster than any ship had ever transited the binary maze. Where other pilots took 6 hours to carefully navigate the approved safe route, Sojin danced through the deadly system in 37 minutes. She timed her passage to match the orbital period of the binary stars, using their own rotation to fling her forward like a stone from a sling. As she cleared the far side of the system, her sensors showed something remarkable. Not only had she survived the transit, but her cargo was completely undamaged and her ship had actually gained speed instead of losing it. Transit complete, Hannah announced. Hull integrity 98%, cargo status secure. Current velocity 156% of entry speed. Time to next obstacle. At current speed, we will reach the Phantom Gate in 14 hours instead of the calculated 23 hours. Sojin, we are significantly ahead of schedule. Back at the monitoring station, the alien observers sat in stunned silence. The betting pools were in chaos as odds that had seemed certain suddenly became questionable. For the first time since the Void Run had been established as a shipping route, someone had not just survived the binary maze, but had done it faster and more efficiently than any computer model suggested was possible. How do we classify this technique? Keth Prime asked, frantically taking notes. The human showed no mathematical preparation, yet achieved optimal results through what appears to be intuitive navigation. You classify it as human, Dr. Yoon Seo replied. And you start adjusting your probability calculations to account for variables your computers have never measured, Admiral. Vex 9 stared at the sensor readings that showed the Soul's pride racing away from the binary system at impossible speed. For the first time in his long career, he began to worry that he might lose his bet. So Jin settled back in her pilot seat and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She was now halfway through the void run, and not only was she still alive, but she was making better time than anyone had predicted. The medical supplies in her cargo hold were still secure, and her ship was performing better than ever. But ahead of her lay the obstacle that had destroyed more ships than all the others combined. The Phantom Gate was waiting, and it would test abilities she was not sure she possessed. Hannah, tell me about the pilots who have attempted the Phantom Gate. Records show 847 attempts over the past century. Success rate 0%. The gate exists in quantum superposition and becomes solid only when not directly observed. Ships that use sensors to navigate find empty space. Ships that fly blind are torn apart by spatial distortions they cannot detect. So Jin nodded thoughtfully. So we need to navigate something we cannot see, using senses we do not have, through space that may not exist. That is an accurate summary of the challenge. Good thing I am human, Sojin said, and began preparing for the impossible. The Phantom Gate sat at the coordinates where it should be, except it was not there. Sojin's sensors showed nothing but empty space, but her ship's gravitational detectors picked up massive distortions that indicated something huge was warping space-time in that exact location. Hannah, explain the quantum mechanics of the Phantom Gate one more time. The gate exists in quantum superposition between solid and non-solid states. When observed directly through sensors or visual contact, the quantum wave function collapses and the gate becomes non-existent. However, when not observed, it maintains physical form capable of allowing transit. So Jin rubbed her temples. So I have to navigate through a wormhole that disappears if I look at it, but will kill me if I do not know where it is. That is correct. Previous attempts have used various approaches. Some pilots tried to navigate using only mathematical calculations based on gravitational readings. Others attempted to fly through while looking away from their sensors. All failed. What killed them? Ships that relied on calculations found empty space where the gate should have been. Ships that flew blind encountered spatial distortions they could not avoid because they could not see them coming. So Jin sat in her pilot chair and closed her eyes. This was the obstacle that had ended every previous attempt at the void run. 847 ships had tried to solve this puzzle. 847 ships had failed, but none of those ships had been flown by a human. Hannah, show me the sensor data from the last 10 attempts. Her display filled with recordings from the final moments of various alien pilots. She watched a Krolix captain try to navigate using pure mathematics, only to fly through empty space where his calculations said the gate should be. She saw a Benthari science vessel attempt to use quantum sensors to track the gate's position, but the moment their instruments focused on the location, the gate vanished. The most interesting failure was from a Thorian mining ship that had tried to navigate by sound. The silicon-based Thorians could detect spatial distortions through vibrations in their crystalline bodies. Their ship had actually found the gate and begun to enter it, but halfway through the transit they had encountered a gravitational shear that tore their vessel apart. The Thorian approach was closest to success, Sojin observed. They navigated by feeling the distortions instead of seeing them. But something went wrong during the transit. Analysis suggests they encountered an unexpected spatial fold approximately halfway through the gate. They had no way to detect it without using sensors, and using sensors would have collapsed the gate around them. So Jin studied the data from the failed Thorian attempt. Their ship had been larger than hers with a different hull configuration. But more importantly, their navigation had been based on detecting vibrations through their ship's structure. They felt the spatial distortions the same way a spider feels vibrations in its web. Hannah, can we modify our approach based on the Thorian method? Explain. They navigated by feeling spatial distortions through their ship's hull. But Thorians have crystalline bodies that naturally resonate with gravitational waves. Humans do not have that capability. Correct. Human nervous systems cannot directly detect gravitational distortions. Sojin smiled. But human nervous systems can detect other things. Hannah, can you route the gravitational sensor data through our audio system instead of the visual displays? You want to hear the spatial distortions instead of seeing them? Exactly. Convert all gravitational readings to sound patterns. I will navigate the same way human pilots used to navigate through fog and storms, back when our instruments were not reliable. Hannah processed the request. Gravitational distortion data converted to audio frequency patterns. High-pitched tones indicate strong distortions. Low tones indicate weak areas. Silence indicates normal space, so... Jin put on her headphones and closed her eyes. Immediately, the space around her filled with sound. The phantom gate sang to her in tones that no other species could hear, because no other species would think to listen. Beginning approach, she announced, and shut off her visual displays entirely. Flying blind through space was terrifying in ways that combat pilots back on Earth could never have imagined. At least atmospheric pilots could sense up and down through gravity and air pressure. In space, there was no reference point except the sounds coming through her headphones. The audio patterns guided her forward. High-pitched whines told her where the spatial distortions were strongest. Low rumbles indicated the stable areas where her ship could safely travel. And somewhere ahead of her, the phantom gate hummed with a deep, resonant tone that seemed to call her forward. "Gate entry detected," Hannah announced. "You are flying directly toward the quantum anomaly." So-Jin could hear it now, a complex harmony of gravitational waves that painted a three-dimensional map in her mind. The gate was not just a simple opening. It was a tunnel through folded space with twists and turns that would crush any ship that took the wrong path. But she could hear the safe route. The gravitational harmonics created a melody that guided her through the invisible maze. High notes warned her away from dangerous areas. Low notes showed her where the tunnel was wide enough for safe passage. And underlying it all was a rhythm that told her when to speed up and when to slow down. "So-Jin, you are entering the gate now," Hannah said. "I am detecting massive spatial distortions around us, but the quantum wave function remains stable. The gate is solid." The music of folded spacetime grew more complex as she flew deeper into the tunnel. What had seemed like simple tones from the outside revealed themselves as intricate symphonies of gravitational waves. So-Jin found herself making navigation decisions based on musical patterns that her conscious mind could not understand, but her deeper instincts recognized perfectly. "Spatial fold detected ahead," Hannah warned. "This is the obstacle that destroyed the Thorian vessel." So-Jin heard it before Hannah finished speaking. A discordant note in the gravitational symphony, like a wrong chord in an otherwise perfect piece of music. The Thorian ship had hit this distortion because they could not detect it soon enough to change course. But So-Jin was not following the same path as the Thorian ship. The audio navigation system had guided her along a slightly different route, one that curved around the dangerous fold instead of flying directly into it. "Spatial fold avoided," Hannah announced. "You are approaching the exit point." The gravitational music began to fade as So-Jin neared the far end of the tunnel. The complex harmonies simplified back into simple tones and finally into silence as she emerged into normal space on the other side of the phantom gate. "Transit complete," Hannah said. "Hull integrity 100%. Cargo status secure. Congratulations, So-Jin. You are the first pilot to successfully navigate the phantom gate." So-Jin opened her eyes and reactivated her visual displays. The normal starfield looked strange after flying blind for so long. But ahead of her, clearly visible on her navigation sensors, was her destination. The Kepler 442c system lay just 3 hours away at standard cruise speed. "Hannah, send a message to the Galactic Trading Station. Tell them the Soul's Pride has successfully completed the void run." Message sent. "So-Jin, you should know that betting odds have shifted dramatically. Your success probability is now rated at 94%. So-Jin laughed. "A little late for that calculation." Behind her, the phantom gate had already vanished from her sensors, returning to its quantum superposition state. But in her memory, she could still hear the gravitational music that had guided her through the impossible passage. It was a song that no other species would ever hear, because no other species would think to listen for it. The final approach to Kepler 442c was routine after everything she had been through. As the plague-stricken colony appeared on her sensors, So-Jin felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with winning her bet. The medical supplies in her cargo hold would save millions of lives, and she had proven that human determination could overcome even the most impossible odds. Kepler 442c Colony Control. This is the Soul's Pride requesting immediate docking clearance for emergency medical cargo delivery. The response came back immediately, filled with disbelief and hope. Soul's Pride, we show you are transmitting from the Void Run approach vector. Please confirm your identity and cargo manifest. Confirmed, Colony Control. So-Jin Park commanding. carrying full medical supply package for plague treatment, requesting priority docking at medical facility. There was a long pause before the next transmission. Soul's Pride, you should know that we stopped hoping for that cargo delivery 3 weeks ago. Every medical expert in the galaxy said the void run was impossible. Sojin smiled as she guided her ship toward the colony's docking facilities. Colony control, you might want to adjust your expert opinions about what humans can accomplish. The docking procedure was flawless, and within an hour Sojin was watching medical teams unload the precious cargo that would end the plague. Children who had been dying that morning would be healthy within days. Families that had lost hope now had a future, but her personal victory was just beginning. The news of her success was already spreading through galactic communication networks, and the implications were starting to sink in across dozens of star systems. Humanity had just announced itself. As a major player in galactic affairs, the message arrived while Sojin was helping medical teams distribute the plague treatments. Her communication device buzzed with an urgent priority signal that made everyone in the medical facility look up in surprise. "This is Admiral Chen Dao of the Galactic Council Emergency Response Fleet," came the voice through her communicator. "Pilot Park, we need to speak with you immediately." Sojin looked around at the busy medical teams who were already preparing the treatments that would save the colony. Her job here was done. The plague would be stopped and the people would live. Everything else was just details. "I am available for communication, Admiral," she replied. "Not over open channels. We are dispatching a courier ship to your location. Please prepare for immediate departure to Council headquarters. This matter requires urgent discussion." 2 hours later, Sojin found herself aboard a sleek Council diplomatic vessel, racing through hyperspace toward the galactic capital. The courier ship was faster than anything she had ever flown, but after navigating the void run, normal hyperspace travel felt almost boring. The ship's captain was a tall, elegant being from the Astron Collective who introduced himself as Navigator Velthen. Like most of his species, he had 4 arms and silver skin that changed color based on his emotional state. Right now his skin showed the deep blue patterns that indicated intense curiosity. "Pilot Park," he said as they entered hyperspace, "I must ask, how did you accomplish what our best computer said was impossible?" Sojin settled back in the passenger seat and considered her answer. "I stopped trying to do what computers do best and started doing what humans do best, which is adapting, improvising, finding solutions that do not make mathematical sense but work anyway." Velthen's skin shifted to purple, indicating confusion. "But mathematics describes the fundamental laws of reality. How can a solution that defies mathematics still function?" "Mathematics describes what we can measure and predict," Sojin said. "But reality includes variables that we have not learned to measure yet. Humans are good at working with unknown variables." 3 hours later, they arrived at Council headquarters, a massive space station that orbited the galactic core. Sojin had never seen anything so large. The station was big enough to house entire cities, and its docking bays could accommodate thousands of ships at once. The council chamber was even more impressive. Representatives from 47 different species sat in concentric circles around a central speaking platform. The air hummed with translation devices working in dozens of languages, and the lighting was adjusted to accommodate beings whose eyes worked in different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. Admiral Chen Dao stood at the central podium, waiting for Sojin to join him. He was human, about her father's age, with gray hair and the kind of bearing that came from commanding starships in dangerous situations. "Pilot Park," he said as she approached the podium, "you have created what some are calling the greatest navigation breakthrough in galactic history, but you have also created a significant problem." Sojin looked around at the assembled representatives. Many of them were the same species she had seen in the betting pools, watching her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to concern to outright fear. "What kind of problem, Admiral?" "The kind of problem that happens when someone proves that the fundamental assumptions underlying galactic commerce are wrong," he replied. "Your success has invalidated every shipping route calculation in the known galaxy." The chamber fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. Sojin began to understand why she had been summoned so urgently. "Show her the data," Admiral Chen Dao said to his aide. The chamber's main display activated, showing shipping routes throughout the galaxy. Red lines indicated passages that were considered too dangerous for commercial traffic. Yellow lines showed routes that were possible but extremely expensive, due to the risks involved. Green lines marked the safe, profitable shipping lanes that formed the backbone of galactic trade. These risk assessments were calculated using the same probability engines that predicted your failure, the Admiral explained. If those calculations were wrong about the Void Run, they might be wrong about thousands of other routes. Sojin studied the display and immediately saw what he meant. There were red zones throughout the galaxy that might actually be navigable using human techniques. Trade routes that had been abandoned for centuries might suddenly become profitable again. The entire economic structure of galactic commerce could be turned upside down. Furthermore, Admiral Chendao continued, we have received over 3,000 contract offers for human pilots in the past 6 hours. Every major shipping corporation in the galaxy wants to hire humans to attempt routes they previously considered impossible. The representative from the Krolix Trading Consortium stood up to address the chamber. Admiral Vex 9 looked considerably less confident than he had at the betting station. The Krolix Consortium wishes to formally request that humanity consider an exclusive partnership arrangement, he announced. We are prepared to offer substantial compensation for human navigation services. Immediately, a dozen other representatives stood up with competing offers. The chamber filled with the sounds of various species trying to outbid each other for access to human pilots. Admiral Chendao raised his hand for silence. Which brings us to the real issue, he said. Humanity has been a minor member of the Galactic Council for 50 years. Suddenly you have become one of the most valuable resources in known space. How do you want to handle this situation? Sojin looked around the chamber at all the alien faces watching her expectantly. 6 hours ago, these same beings had been laughing at her chances of survival. Now they were fighting over the opportunity to hire humans for their most dangerous shipping runs. I have a few questions first, she said. How many shipping routes are currently considered impossible due to navigation hazards? Admiral Chendao consulted his datapad. Approximately 12,000 routes are classified as non-navigable. Another 30,000 are considered economically unfeasible due to high risk factors. And how many human pilots are currently qualified for deep space navigation? Including yourself, approximately 847 pilots have the necessary certifications and experience. Sojin smiled. The numbers were perfect. Then I suggest we approach this systematically. Earth will establish a human navigation guild to train and certify pilots for hazardous route navigation. We will not sign exclusive contracts with any single corporation or species. The chamber erupted in protest from various trading consortiums who had hoped to monopolize human navigation services. However, Sojin continued, raising her voice above the noise, we will make our services available to any organization that meets our requirements for safety, fair compensation, and humanitarian benefit. What kind of requirements? Asked the representative from the Benthari Science Division. Priority will be given to missions that save lives, deliver critical supplies to underserved colonies, or otherwise benefit the galactic community. Commercial cargo will be accepted, but humanitarian missions come first. Admiral Vex 9's skin turned an angry shade of red. You are in no position to dictate terms to established trading powers, he said. Humans are still a minor species in galactic affairs. Sojin looked at him calmly. Admiral, 6 hours ago you were so certain that humans could not navigate the Void Run that you bet against us. How did that work out for you? The chamber fell silent again. Several representatives made sounds that Sojin had learned were the alien equivalent of nervous laughter. The point, she continued, is that humanity has just proven that our methods work where traditional approaches fail. We are not asking for special treatment. We are offering specialized services in exchange for fair compensation and the opportunity to help beings throughout the galaxy. Dr. Yun Seo, who had been observing from the gallery, stood up to address the chamber. If I may add a scientific perspective, she said, the techniques demonstrated by Pilot Park represent a fundamentally different approach to navigation. Traditional methods rely on computational prediction and mathematical modeling. Human methods appear to rely on pattern recognition, intuitive decision-making, and real-time adaptation. What does that mean in practical terms? Asked Keth Prime. It means that humans can navigate routes that are too complex or chaotic for computer-based systems to handle. Routes where conditions change faster than calculations can be processed. Routes where success depends on abilities that cannot be programmed into machines. Admiral Chendao nodded thoughtfully. Dr. Lee raises an important point. This is not just about hiring human pilots. This is about developing entirely new approaches to space navigation that could benefit all species. Exactly, Sojin said. The Human Navigation Guild will not just train pilots. We will also research and document these techniques so they can be studied and understood by the broader galactic community. The representative from the Thorian Mining Collective stood up slowly. When Thorians moved, it sounded like rocks grinding together. The Thorian Collective wishes to formally apologize for our previous dismissive attitude toward human capabilities, he announced. We also wish to request joint research opportunities to study human navigation methods. More representatives stood up with similar requests. The mood in the chamber had shifted from competitive bidding to collaborative interest. The aliens were beginning to understand that human navigation techniques could advance the entire field of space travel, not just provide services for hire. There is one more thing, Sojin said as the chamber quieted down. I want to establish a memorial fund for the pilots who died attempting impossible routes. Their failures taught us what did not work, which was just as valuable as learning what does work. She gestured toward the display showing the thousands of red-marked routes. Every one of those impossible passages has a graveyard of ships whose crews died trying to find a way through. They deserve to be remembered as explorers and pioneers, not as failures. The silence in the chamber was different now, more respectful, more thoughtful. Admiral Chendow spoke first. The Galactic Council will support the establishment of both the Human Navigation Guild and the Pioneer Memorial Fund. Humanity has earned full membership status in galactic affairs through your demonstration of unique and valuable capabilities. Furthermore, added the Benthari representative, the Science Division wishes to propose a joint research initiative to study human navigation methods. We believe these techniques could lead to breakthroughs in our understanding of consciousness, intuition, and decision-making under uncertainty. Sojin smiled. I accept all proposals for cooperation and research. But I have one condition. What condition? Asked Admiral Vex 9, still looking somewhat uncomfortable. The first graduates of the Human Navigation Guild will attempt to open the Crimson Passage to the Outer Rim colonies. Those settlements have been cut off from galactic trade for 30 years because no one could find a safe route through the stellar nursery region. The chamber erupted again, but this time with excitement rather than protest. The Crimson Passage was legendary among pilots as the most dangerous navigation challenge in the galaxy. Opening that route would reconnect 12 isolated colony systems to galactic civilization. If successful, Sojin continued, it will prove that human navigation techniques can solve problems that benefit everyone, not just the wealthy trading corporations. Admiral Chendow grinned. Pilot Park, I think you have just redefined what it means to be human in this galaxy. 3 months later, Sojin stood on the observation deck of the newly established Human Navigation Training Center, watching the latest class of pilot candidates practice their techniques in simulation chambers. The center orbited Earth's moon, giving trainees a view of their homeworld as they learned to navigate by instinct and intuition rather than pure calculation. Her communicator buzzed with an incoming message. It was Hannah, transmitting from the Soul's Pride, where the AI was now helping to train the next generation of human navigators. Sojin, I have an interesting update on the betting pools. What kind of update? The final payout from your Void Run bet has been calculated. With compound interest and bonus multipliers, your winnings total 847 million galactic credits. Sojin nearly choked on her coffee. That is enough to buy a small moon. Yes. However, there is also news about Admiral Vex 9. He has requested a meeting to discuss hiring human pilots for a humanitarian mission to deliver emergency supplies to flood-damaged colonies in the Rigel system. The same admiral who was so sure I would fail? The same. Apparently, he has developed a new appreciation for human capabilities. Sojin laughed. Tell him I will consider his proposal, but humanitarian missions go through the Guild's standard application process like everyone else. Message sent. Sojin, there is one more thing. The Galactic Probability Institute has officially retired their old risk assessment algorithms and is developing new models that include human factor variables. What kind of variables? Determination, creativity, adaptability, and something they are calling intuitive problem-solving capacity. They say these variables cannot be measured mathematically, but they clearly affect outcomes in ways that pure calculation cannot predict. So-Jin looked out at the stars beyond Earth's moon. Somewhere out there, human pilots were attempting routes that had been considered impossible for centuries. Some would succeed, opening new pathways for trade and communication. Others might fail, but their attempts would provide data for future successes. Hannah, what are the new probability calculations for human success on impossible missions? The Institute says they can no longer calculate those probabilities using traditional methods. Human outcomes appear to be influenced by variables that exist outside their mathematical models. So what do they recommend? They recommend betting on the humans. So-Jin smiled as she watched a training ship practice emergency maneuvers in Earth's orbital space. The pilot was learning to navigate by feel rather than sensors, developing the instincts that would allow humans to go where no other species could follow. The galaxy had learned an important lesson about underestimating humanity. But more importantly, humanity had learned something about itself. When the odds seemed impossible, when the computers said there was no solution when everyone else had given up, humans had a tendency to find a way. And now, with the Human Navigation Guild training new pilots and opening impossible routes throughout the galaxy, the universe was about to discover what humans could really accomplish when they stopped trying to be like everyone else and started being themselves. The betting pools had closed, but the real game was just beginning. 6 months after the Void Run, So-Jin stood in the command center of the Human Navigation Guild headquarters, watching real-time displays of 43 active missions across the galaxy. Red dots marked the positions of human pilots attempting routes that had been impossible just a year ago. Green indicators showed successful transits. Yellow warnings indicated pilots requesting assistance or backup. Guild Command, this is Captain Min-ho aboard the Busan Explorer, came a transmission from the Andromeda sector. We have successfully opened the Nebula Gate passage. Repeat, the Nebula Gate is now navigable. Colonial supply ships can begin using this route immediately. So-Jin smiled as she marked another impossible route as conquered. The Nebula Gate had been closed for 80 years due to electromagnetic storms that scrambled all conventional navigation systems. Captain Min-ho had solved it by learning to navigate using the storm patterns themselves as reference points. Excellent work, Captain, she replied. Medical supplies for the outer colonies will begin shipping through your route within 24 hours. Her aide, Lieutenant Jiwoo Chen, approached with the daily progress report. Guild Commander, we now have successful transits recorded for 847 previously impossible routes. Pilot survival rate is holding steady at 94.7%, and mission success rate is 91.2%. What about the Crimson Passage? Captain Hyojin's team is making good progress. They have successfully mapped the first 3 sections of the Stellar Nursery region. Current estimates suggest they will reach the Outer Rim colonies within 2 weeks. So-Jin nodded thoughtfully. The Crimson Passage was still the ultimate test of human navigation abilities. If they could reconnect the isolated Outer Rim colonies to galactic civilization, it would prove once and for all that human pilots could accomplish anything. A priority communication signal interrupted her thoughts. Guild Command, this is Admiral Chen Dao calling from Council Headquarters. We have an urgent situation that requires immediate consultation. Go ahead, Admiral. We have received a distress signal from the research station at Wolf 359. They are reporting a critical failure in their containment systems for exotic matter research. The station will be destroyed in 72 hours unless emergency evacuation is completed. So-Jin felt a chill run down her spine. What is the problem with normal evacuation procedures? Wolf 359 is located in the middle of the Forbidden Zone. No standard navigation systems can function there due to spatial anomalies caused by dark matter concentrations. It is the one region of space that even our best human pilots have not attempted to enter. The Forbidden Zone was legendary among spacers as the most dangerous region in known space. Ships that entered the zone simply vanished, leaving no trace and no wreckage. The few automated probes that had been sent into the area had transmitted increasingly strange data before losing contact completely. How many people are on the research station? 2,000 scientists and support staff from 17 different species. Admiral, if they cannot be evacuated, it will be the largest loss of life in galactic history. So-Jin looked at the display showing her active pilots. All of them were experienced, but none had attempted anything as dangerous as the Forbidden Zone. This would require her best people, and even then, the odds were unknown. Admiral, I am assuming the Galactic Council is formally requesting Human Navigation Guild assistance with this evacuation. The Council is requesting, the research station is begging, and I am asking as a personal favor, Admiral Chen Dao replied. Sojin, those people are going to die unless someone can figure out how to navigate the Forbidden Zone. Humans are literally the only hope they have. Sojin made her decision. We accept the mission. I will personally lead the evacuation fleet. Sojin, you do not have to do this yourself. You have already proven what human... Sojin made her decision. We accept the mission. I will personally lead the evacuation fleet. Sojin, you do not have to do this yourself. You have already proven what humans can accomplish. Send one of your other pilots. Admiral, this is not about proving anything. This is about saving 2,000 lives. If there is any chance of success, I need to be there to make the decisions that might mean the difference between rescue and disaster. 3 hours later, Sojin was aboard the Soul's Pride again, leading a fleet of 5 human-piloted ships toward the Forbidden Zone. Her crew included the best pilots from the Navigation Guild, each one volunteering for a mission that might be their last. Captain Minho had insisted on joining the mission, despite having just completed the Nebula Gate transit. You taught us that humans do not abandon people in danger, he said. If you are going into the Forbidden Zone, we are going with you. Captain Hyjin had postponed her Crimson Passage mission to join the rescue fleet. The Outer Rim colonies have waited 30 years, she said. They can wait a few more days while we save some lives. As they approached the edge of the Forbidden Zone, Sojin's instruments began showing readings that made no sense. Space itself seemed to be twisted into impossible shapes. Her gravitational sensors detected masses that could not exist, and her navigation computer kept crashing as it tried to process contradictory data. Hannah, what are you detecting? Sojin, the spatial distortions in this region are unlike anything in our databases. Normal physics appears to be suspended. I am detecting areas where time moves at different rates, regions where gravity flows backward, and zones where the electromagnetic spectrum has been shifted into configurations that should be impossible. Can you convert the anomalies to audio patterns like we did with the Phantom Gate? I am trying, but the distortions are too complex. It would be like trying to convert a symphony into a single musical note. There is too much information to process. Sojin studied the sensor data streaming across her displays. The Forbidden Zone was not just one type of hazard. It was dozens of different anomalies layered on top of each other, creating a maze of impossible physics that changed constantly. But as she watched the pattern, something familiar began to emerge. The chaos was not random. There was an underlying structure, like a river flowing beneath turbulent rapids. Hannah, ignore the surface anomalies. Can you detect any deeper patterns in the spatial distortions? Hannah processed the data for several seconds. Yes, there appears to be a stable foundation beneath the chaotic upper layers. The anomalies seem to be fluctuations around a core structure that remains constant. Like waves on the surface of a deep ocean? That is an accurate analogy. The waves are chaotic and dangerous, but the ocean itself has predictable currents. Sojin smiled. Then we navigate the ocean, not the waves. Hannah, plot a course based on the deep structure patterns. Ignore the surface anomalies completely. Sojin, that approach will take us directly through the most dangerous regions. Surface anomalies in those areas show 100% destruction probability. But if we are following the deep currents, the surface anomalies should not matter. We will be moving with the natural flow of space-time instead of fighting against it. The rescue fleet entered the Forbidden Zone using a navigation technique that had never been attempted before. Instead of trying to avoid the dangerous anomalies, they flew directly through them while following the underlying patterns that Hannah had detected. The journey was like flying through a cosmic storm while following an invisible river. Space twisted around them in ways that made Sojin's eyes water, but the Soul's Pride held together as it rode the deep currents through the chaos. Fleet status report, Sojin called to her other pilots. Busan Explorer holding steady, reported Captain Minho. Hull integrity at 97%. This is actually less stressful than the Nebula Gate. Daegu Runner reporting normal operations, added Captain Hyjin. Sojin, how did you know the deep structure would be stable? I did not know, Sojin admitted. But humans have been navigating dangerous waters for thousands of years. Sometimes you have to trust that there is solid ground beneath the surface chaos. 12 hours later, the rescue fleet reached the research station at Wolf 359. The facility was massive. built to house thousands of scientists studying the exotic properties of dark matter. But now it was a tomb waiting to happen, with containment systems failing and exotic matter beginning to destabilize. The evacuation took 18 hours of continuous work. Sojin's pilots used shuttles to ferry scientists and equipment from the doomed station to the rescue ships, making dozens of trips through the dangerous anomalies of the Forbidden Zone. Dr. Wylin Park, the station's chief scientist, was among the last to be evacuated. She was human, and she looked at Sojin with a mixture of gratitude and amazement as she came aboard the Soul's Pride. "Commander Park," she said, "when we sent the distress signal, we never expected anyone to actually come for us. The Forbidden Zone has been considered absolutely impassable for over a century. Dr. Park, humans have a saying. Impossible just means no one has figured out how to do it yet." The return journey through the Forbidden Zone was easier now that Sojin understood the deep structure patterns. Her fleet carried 2,000 rescued scientists and researchers back to safety, proving once again that human determination could overcome seemingly impossible odds. As they cleared the edge of the Forbidden Zone, Sojin received a priority transmission from Admiral Chendao. "Sojin, the Galactic Council has just voted unanimously to officially designate humanity as a major galactic power. This is the first time in galactic history that a species has achieved major power status based purely on specialized abilities rather than military force or economic dominance." Sojin looked at her display showing the rescued scientists, settling into temporary quarters aboard her fleet. "Admiral, with respect, I do not think humanity wants to be a major power in the traditional sense." "What do you mean?" "We do not want to dominate or control anyone. We want to help. We want to go places others cannot go, do things others cannot do, and solve problems that seem impossible. We want to be the species that other species can count on when everything else has failed." There was a long pause before Admiral Chendao replied, "Sojin, I think that might be exactly what the galaxy needs." 1 year later, Sojin stood in the memorial garden at Human Navigation Guild headquarters, reading the names carved into the monument, honoring pilots who had died attempting impossible missions. The list included both humans and aliens, all of them explorers who had pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. Captain Heejin had successfully opened the Crimson Passage 6 months earlier, reconnecting the Outer Rim colonies to galactic civilization. Captain Minho was currently attempting to map a route through the galactic core region that would cut travel times between major systems by 70%. The Human Navigation Guild now operated 847 active pilots, flying impossible routes throughout the galaxy. They had opened trade corridors, delivered emergency supplies to disaster areas, and rescued populations that would otherwise have been lost. But more importantly, they had changed how the galaxy thought about impossible challenges. Other species were beginning to adopt human approaches to problem solving, learning to trust intuition and creativity alongside mathematical calculation. "Guild Commander," came a voice from behind her. It was Lieutenant Jiwoo with the daily mission reports. "What is our status, Lieutenant?" "All active missions proceeding nominally. No emergencies requiring immediate attention. However, we have received an interesting request from the Galactic Exploration Division." "What kind of request?" "They want to know if human pilots would be willing to attempt navigation to other galaxies. Initial surveys suggest that intergalactic space contains anomalies that make even the Forbidden Zone look simple." Sojin smiled as she looked up at the stars visible beyond Earth's atmosphere. Somewhere out there, new challenges waited for human pilots to discover and overcome, new impossible odds that someone would need to call dibs on. "Tell the Exploration Division that the Human Navigation Guild accepts their challenge," she said. "But they should know by now what happens when they tell humans that something is impossible." "What happens, Commander?" "We prove them wrong." As Sojin walked back toward the Guild Command Center, she thought about her grandmother Hannah Park, who had navigated Saturn's rings when everyone said it could not be done. She thought about the Soul's Pride, still flying impossible routes with an AI that had learned to think like a human pioneer. Most of all, she thought about a betting pool that had given her 2.1% odds of survival, and how she had called dibs on the other 97.9%. The galaxy had learned not to bet against humans when the odds seemed impossible. Now it was time to teach the universe the same lesson.